What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Smooth Podcast, simply motivating others onward through hope. And motivating is what this guy is to me. I know of him. I know him kinda, and I'm hoping to get to know him a little bit more. And I'm hoping that he kinda can open himself up for you guys out there as well. Kev Martins, what's going on, man?
How's it going, man? Thank you for having me. I've been a long-time fan of the podcast, so
I appreciate that.
Good that we can make this happen.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. At first, I just want to give like a cool little nod to, Rhode Island's a very small place, and when you're around like the Providence, East Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls area, everyone's kind of like one person away from knowing the other person, and so I always like heard this guy's name in different elements, but I've always heard this guy's name, and I want to say the first time I was actually in the same room as him, we were both getting a degree. So I thought that was pretty unique.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was both at J Wu.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we walked the stage separate times, but we both walked the stage. I thought that was pretty dope.
Awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So let's start off with your early life, man. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Pawtucket. I mean, born in Providence, raised in Pawtucket. But I was probably a month old when my parents actually sent me to Cape Verde. So my parents moved here just before I was born. And my father has other children, so he wanted to bring them over, but they were recent immigrants, couldn't afford it. So as soon as I was born, I was a month old. You should see my first passport picture. I was literally laying on the bed. Mm-hmm. And then I was in Cape Verde for probably 3.5 years, and then came back just in time to start elementary school.
Now, in your eyes, why do you think Pawtucket, and this might be a difficult question to answer, but why do you think Pawtucket has such a massive Cape Verdean culture? Like, what about Pawtucket are people in Cape Verde like, oh, like we should go there? You know what I mean?
Well, a part of this is actually history. Generally, people will tend to group in areas where they can navigate more easily whenever they emigrate to a place, because you want to be able to get your groceries, you want to be able to get your utilities, you want to be able to navigate a community before you can even learn, the language. So if you don't have that, you rely on family, friends who live in the area. Pawtucket became Pawtucket largely because of the policies in Providence. So initially, the east side and really, that Fox Point, Main Street area is where more Cape Verdeans lived. It's where they worked, South Main Street specifically. But over time, there were policies that kind of pushed them out. Those were blighted properties. And then when they redeveloped a lot of those spaces, Cape Verdeans couldn't afford to stay there. So some Cape Verdeans moved up into Mass, and there was already some in, the greater Boston area, but some Cape Verdeans moved up into Mass. A good number of the ones who were on the east side in Providence actually started moving into Pawtucket towards that Main Street area. And so again, as more and more waves came through, especially in the 80s, when there was another huge wave of Cape Verdeans, 80s, early 90s, they started to settle more so into Pawtucket.
Okay, cool. And so early life, we're talking like maybe like middle school. How is life? Like, are you easily adapting to American culture? Are you noticing some hiccups along the way? What's going on like around middle school?
I reflect on this a lot. When I was really young, my parents were poor, so we didn't have like name brand shoes. So, me and my brother actually used to get picked on a lot, because we'd have, shoes from Payless. And so every day I ended up in like a fight after school because someone would say something. Eventually I just got sick of actually getting chased home from school. So, I ended up having a fight, stand my ground. That was probably 4th, 5th grade. By the time I got into junior high school, it still was pretty rough. Probably my 6th grade year, I think that was the first time I had a name brand pair of shoes. And then at 12, 13, I'm in junior high school. Junior high school is rough for everybody, but that's when I started working. So I was probably 12 years old when I got my first job, so I could afford shoes. Never really participated in a lot of programs, and because my parents worked a lot, it was kind of on me and my brother to just kind of take care of one another. My parents worked from early morning until night, and they only took breaks to either pick us up from school and drop us off at like a grandma's house or some other daycare. So we were kind of left to ourselves a lot.
What was your first job?
My first job was actually cleaning up sidewalks. This was a grant by someone who lived on our street, got money from the city to employ some of the neighborhood kids.
Oh, that's dope.
And so I got $40 a week to help clean sidewalks of like weeds and other trash in the Woodlawn area.
Oh wow, that's dope.
And back then, you could afford a pair of like
Yeah,
low cut Air Force One. So, a couple weeks and I was already ahead of the game.
Right. And so high school, how was high school for you?
I think high school was when I started to come a little bit into my own. Throughout elementary, junior high school, and high school, there were a few themes that, were present then that I reflected on later in life. One of them was poverty and kind of that immigrant identity. Two was growing up in an environment that was very violent. When I was walking to school, when I was coming home from school, it felt normal, back then. But as you get older and reflect, you start to realize that those experiences really impact your development.
Yep.
And it wasn't all bad, because there was certainly, the corner store owner who was part of the village, who saw you doing something you shouldn't, might tell your mom, neighbors. But when you grow up in that environment and you start to think it's a little bit normal, you develop different mechanisms to try to protect yourself and others. So by the time I got to high school, I had been, fighting bullies who were bullying me. I was getting suspended from school a lot for behavioral issues. But what was really challenging for, I think, a lot of my teachers is that I was a brilliant student. So, even in sixth grade, I got suspended once every quarter, right? But when I was suspended, my father, being the man that he is like, you better make sure that you're at home doing your work. So I would go home, I would do almost all of my work that they'd give me for that week I was suspended on the first day. And my father's like, you're not going to stay home and do nothing. So I'd go back to school, get the rest of my work. By the time I came back from that 1 week suspension, I'd be a month ahead of the rest of the class.
Wow.
So I'm literally sitting in that classroom waiting for people to catch up because of my behavioral issue. But again, because of my academic abilities, I was able to navigate school relatively, easy. And by the time I got to high school, I almost thought it was a punishment that they kept putting me in these very smart classes, because the rest of my friend groups, the ones I grew up with on Main Street, they're not in these classes. They're with friends, they're having a good time, and it almost felt like a punishment to get extra work.
Yeah.
Even though it was at my ability, I just never had any teachers at that time who took me aside and said, you should really take this serious. You have some really good abilities and you could go somewhere with this. I think they just continued to see that I was, getting into some fights and trouble, and they kind of just let me be.
How did you identify yourself back then? Because a lot of the times, like, especially our formative years, middle school, high school, what others are continuously calling us, or what we want to fit into, or our friends around us, kind of, we hone in that identification for ourselves. So if you're being told that, okay, if you fight a lot, if you get suspended a lot, that means that you're a bad kid. Did any of those like identities like truly like ingrain themselves into you, or what was happening with that, like your psyche during that time?
I think I thought of myself as a good person. I think most people do. I just recognize that sometimes you have to develop a certain set of skills to navigate your environment. And so, again, now I would reflect and say I was trying to survive, right? And what does that look like for somebody who's 14, 15, 16, who at any given time, either walking home or to school, is not necessarily in fear for their life, but in fear of what could happen to you. There's a great book by Ta-Nehisi Coates called Between the World and Me, and he illustrates this beautifully when he talks about how young black boys really don't have agency over their body. The police can do whatever they want to you, and you can't really fight back. And teachers could say, especially in those days, whatever they wanted about you. And your parents don't really know better. They're going to just take the teacher's word for it. And so you feel this constant vulnerability that at times you have to develop this tough exterior, this demeanor that says, don't mess with me. And that's exactly what I did. It was well known at that time, high school, even early college, that I was no nonsense, that you couldn't mess with me. I had a very short temper. I made sure that if I had an issue with somebody, they knew about it, and I would address it quickly. And, right or wrong, then my friends started to understand, oh, if I got a problem, Kevin's my problem solver. Like, I can call him and he can come and make sure that, whatever's going on, that I feel safe, wherever we're going.
Yeah. So the short temper, did that exist before the bullying? Like when you were in middle school and people were making fun of your shoes or whatever the case may be, like, did you have a short temper before that, or that was a result of that?
I don't think it was solely a result of that. I think culturally, I kind of probably learned it from some family members as well. So it was something reinforced at home and with family as well as outwardly. Mm-hmm. So that short temper was not having the right skill set to manage emotions. Mm-hmm. And, when you're young, obviously you have less experiences, less control over your emotions when you're literally a boy. Mm-hmm. It probably lasted longer than I'd like, because well into my high school and even into my college years, it took a lot of time to start to understand how to control that and not let it control me.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there any point of this time period that you enjoyed fighting? Like, you enjoyed being that guy that people could be like, yo, Kev got me, what's up? Like, did you find any enjoyment in it?
I don't think so. I mean, I do remember that there were situations that it felt good that people knew that we were like a family, my friends and I, and you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And then specifically, Kevin's the one you don't want to mess with, because while you might get away with, one of these other guys, I was someone who wanted to make sure that whether it was one of you or 10 of you, I wasn't going to back down from that. And I think that was in some ways appealing to me. But at the same time, I never, and you might, we might get into it, but people say, like, I'm a humble person. Like, that's just who I am at my core. So I didn't want a name out there. I didn't want people, and there were people who had a name. Like, you heard about these folks from the East Side, and these folks from the South Side, and these folks from the West End, and these folks from Pawtucket. I didn't want my name out there. I actually always thought that was it brought more negativity than positivity to have a target on you constantly. And I saw that from a young age. I would always observe some of what we could call, the OGs. And if I knew a lot about that OG, then I'm sure that the people who didn't like him or had issues with him knew the same information. Mm-hmm. So even as a youth, probably 10, 12 years old, hanging around the park, knowing what these guys were doing, knowing about these guys, it felt like, yeah, I wanted to drive a nice car and I wanted to be known in my neighborhood for good things, but I didn't want to be that vulnerable where someone could always find me, or, they knew more information about me than I wanted out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of hood stories out there with your name on it. I'll think about touching on some as we get forward.
Okay.
So college comes, and mind you, you went to college before social media. Like, when you were a freshman, there's probably not really a social media thing, right?
Well, I think Facebook had just started. It was nothing like what it is today. So, you didn't live your life on Facebook. Right.
So, in my opinion, because back in the day, a lot of people don't understand how divided, in my opinion, like, Rhode Island was. Like, unless you, like, played sports with people from different cities, it was very, like, clicked up city-wise. Mm-hmm. It was not like today where it's like everyone can kind of get along with other people. So being in college and being, a freshman in college, and now you're living and cohabitating with people from all different cities and probably, like, individuals that maybe sets of people that you've had beef with, stuff like that. How was that for you? Like, handling, like, like, either one, like, damn, like, we're all kind of the same and we're all here for the same reason, like, or two, like, a self-reflection of yourself, like, all the stuff that I did before this, like, it was kind of for, like some of the times might have been for nothing if, like, I'm trying to be on this righteous path of being a scholar.
Well, I think that was always the plan. When you ask 3rd, 4th, 5th graders what they want to be, they don't say, I want to be a gangbanger, right? In most circumstances, even in the hood, even when your life isn't ideal, you want to be an astronaut, you want to be a lawyer, you might want to be a basketball player, you might want to be a comedian, you might want to be a therapist, So I always see my life trajectory as I followed the plan, right? Because I wanted to do better than my parents did. That's what they wanted for me. When I would have conversations with my brother at the third, fourth grade, because we shared a bed, never mind a bedroom. We shared a bed, and we would talk to one another, going to sleep, how was your day? And we always talked about living a different life. So when I get to high school, even though I can't necessarily see that life for me, because as you get older, you start to see how doors close for people. And even though you try to avoid those pitfalls, it's very difficult when you come from like an under-resourced community, right? And so I did end up meeting people along the way that would push me in one direction or another. And so when I got to college, even though I was first in my family, didn't really have a lot of friends who went to college. I knew some people. It felt like, man, am I going to be able to do this? And then when you're surrounded, because I go to a university in the same state that I grew up, when you're surrounded with people that you might have had issues with, back in the day, you start to think, okay, do I have to be just as careful here in a suburb, right, in a rural part of the state, as I did in my very urban, city? But for me, because I never went out of my way to cause problems, so, and I think, that was always true for me. I didn't go start problems. I never went to go start problems. For me, it was always about protection for my friends, for myself, making sure nobody messed with us. You knew not to mess with us. So when I got to college, even, seeing some of the people that we might have had some static back in the day, it wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue because, again, I wasn't out there trying to make a name for myself and make an example. I was there doing what I think everybody would want to do for themselves and their friends.
And now, let's talk about your college life. You were part of an organization, correct?
Well, yes, I was part of several organizations. It was one of the first things I did when I got to campus. I joined SASA and NAACP, CVSA, the Cape Verdean Student Association. My freshman year, my sophomore year, I joined even more, and then eventually became an RA. But for the majority of my time in school, I was always affiliated with one or more organizations.
And why was that important for you?
It opened my eyes to different experiences. I went to school to study business because I grew up broke. So I'm thinking, let me go and study business, get a great job, and do better financially. But when I was there, it was my minor that really took hold and I was most passionate about, and that was Africana Studies. So it started to expose me to different histories I wasn't aware of, my own history, even though that was a small piece of it. Most of it was, Black American history. But when you're talking about the diaspora, people coming from Africa and all these different routes, we picked up a piece of Cape Verdean history specifically. But I do see myself as a Black American as well, so it just spoke to me. And I started to understand that, these histories aren't really taught in high school, junior high school, in any meaningful way. They're very surface level. You only know the major figures, right? They can only tell you about Malcolm, Martin, Rosa, right. Thurgood maybe, for so long. When you start to uncover these histories and how complicated they are, it really incited some passion in me. So I did whatever I could to learn more about that, even socially. So I would join organizations that highlighted culture and celebrated culture and built community among other people who looked like me on that campus.
That's what's up. And did you see like a forward career path in that per se, or were you just like solely interested in it? So like wherever this takes me, I'll follow it.
Well, so interestingly enough, I graduate and immediately start my MBA. And when I start my MBA, I meet some incoming freshmen as well as a sophomore who I've known for a long time and was a mentor to him. And they want to create an organization solely dedicated to young men of color. And we didn't have that on campus. We had organizations that you could join for different backgrounds, but not solely for young men of color, because we didn't have the Divine Nine organizations on campus, fraternities. And so the organization was called Brothers on New Direction. There was, I want to say kid, but at the time he was a freshman. His name is Andrew Corey, and his brother Josh went to school out in New York and actually was a part of an organization called Bond. So we got together and, planned for like a semester what this would look like and what it would mean for the campus. And eventually we created what is known as Brothers on New Direction today, which is focused on 5 values: brotherhood, leadership, service, responsibility, and mentorship. And those 5 values, to me, mentorship above all else, because that's what I was able to provide for the organization, me being a grad student, the rest of them being so young. But those 5 values encompassed everything that I thought I would need in my development, right? And had there been that type of structure for me younger, I think I could have done well faster. I don't have many regrets in life, but I think, for me, I try to create what I needed, what I didn't have. I try to be what I needed, and that was a really meaningful way to do that.
And those are the best mentors, in my opinion, of and just the best way of life. Becoming the person that you needed, or becoming the person that you wish that you could have looked up to, right? Like, if you're, whatever is like in your heart with that, like following that path is always like the righteous path to me. And I think it's really dope what you guys did. Shout Drew and my boy Josh. I think Bond was like, I didn't go to URI, but Bond was so instrumental and impactful. I was like, damn, like I wish we had something like that where I went to school,
And same for me back in high school. I think if I had that type of structure in high school, it would have increased opportunities, open doors for me earlier, right? So again, not a lot of regrets, but that's one of the things that for me felt like it was missing for a good part of my life.
And is that still continuing today?
Bond is still strong today. There's hundreds of alumni, and they always have a good 50 to 60 young men in the group active every year. It's amazing to see what they've done. It's amazing to be able to reach out and hear updates from what they got going on. I'm a little more removed now. Obviously, I'm not in college anymore, but I love to see their progress. And I should say, part of the inspiration was also their sister organization, Pink Women, who started a year before Bond and helped inspire a lot of what Bond built their foundation upon.
That was Sabrina.
Sabrina was a president. Well, I guess not so coincidentally, but my wife is actually one of the people who helped found Pink. And that whole story is a long and interesting story, and you should definitely have somebody up here who can tell it better than I can. I feel like I don't have ownership over it, but I saw it from inception to present day, and it's a fantastic story.
Dope. And now, speaking of your wife, seemingly from the outside looking in, you guys are locked in for very early on, right?
So almost 20 years now.
Almost 20 years. So, you don't see that anymore. Never mind 20 years, just the wife part in general, right? Why was that important to you? Why was it important to you to foster a relationship early on? College is usually the years that, everyone is just doing whatever they want. Why did you take the different path of I found this one person, let me lock this in and, let me create a family with this one person?
Yeah. I mean, early on, you don't know that that's the intention. But I had actually known her since junior high school. So we were friends for a long time and good friends, I would say. And then in college, we grew closer. It, like anything, when you're young and you're dating, you just want to see where it goes. And you have your ups and you have your downs. But I had always known her character. I had met her family. I understood where she came from. And, I probably waited too long to even make her my wife because we've only been married since 2016, right? But we were together since 2005. But she challenged me to be a better person. She does that till this day, challenges me to be a better person, better father, better friend. I think she sees things that I don't see. And she can hold a mirror up to me oftentimes to say, this is what I think you really need to hear. And so when you have someone who loves you that much that they will challenge you, they'll tell you when you're wrong. Yeah. They support you. She has spoken things into existence before I thought they were possible, literally. I mean, there are certain things that she said, I know you're going to be able to do this. And I'm like, that'd be great. That'd be great. And then those things happen, and she put them out there and, helped me work towards them. So, when you're building a life with someone, it's just as much about what you give and what you get. And when you get the right things, you're able to give even more. You're able to be supported in your growth. And, I think people look from the outside and you never know someone's relationship. So, and that's important to say too, right? Because we're both, I think, fairly private people. So you don't see a lot on social media, you don't hear a lot. And that's peace for me. That's peace for me. So having that compatibility was great too.
Yeah, that's what's up. After college, you get your master's. What's the next step for you?
So I guess bringing bond back into the focus, while I'm in grad school, I'm getting my MBA, right? So again, got my undergraduate degree in business. The economy starts to tank. So a lot of my friends lose their jobs who had graduated with me and went on to different, State Street and other jobs. So I say, let me extend my time in grad school and spend a little bit more time here waiting out the economy. While I'm there, I'm actually working at the university and I'm working with students. And that experience helped change my thinking on what I wanted to do because money was such a big part of my life because I didn't have it.
Right.
And so I wanted to get a job that I thought would be great, make a lot of money. Not that they were around, but I had a mentor in college who said, you should really think about using your skill set in higher education. Obviously, these students are benefiting from your mentorship and guidance, and you've got a lot to contribute on the academic front too, the management, operations. And so that's what I did. I graduated, and my first job was at the University of Rhode Island, and I was doing student conduct work, and I was helping to advise Bond and other organizations and continuing to support their development for about 4 years. During that time, I should also mention, and it's kind of like is this other pathway, I also started investing in real estate. And so when I was about 16, I had someone put the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad in my hand.
Great book.
And that got me thinking, differently about assets and liabilities. It introduced a new language to me about financial literacy that, they're not gonna teach you in these, especially in public education in Rhode Island. Not at that time. Now there's more information out there. At that time, that book was like, opening up a new world. So it gave me some goals early on that I started working towards. So oddly enough, when the economy, crashed, this was really a tale of two experiences. When the economy crashed and the housing bubble burst, my family ended up losing their house in that
Wow.
2008 crash. Not right away, but because their loan was serviced by Countrywide and they had a subprime rate. But during that same time period, I was able to buy my first house, actually 2 houses during that time period. And I was still in grad school at the time. So I graduated from grad school, started my first job, and I already had, 2 houses.
All right. So what were the 2 houses like? And was it just, 20% down? Like, what did you use to purchase a house?
Well, this is going to make a lot of people upset. I didn't spend a single dime on those houses. And actually, I got paid to buy those houses. Back in 2008, there were 2 waves of stimulus packages specifically for housing. The first wave was to try to incentivize banks to lend because they weren't lending. They had the money, but they weren't lending. They didn't want to make bad loans. And so there was this incentive that you could get 10% of whatever you put down back, up to $80,000, right? So I'm sorry, up to $8,000. So a house that was worth $80,000. If it was 90, you still only get 8. 100, you still only get 8. But if it was a $50,000 house, of which there were plenty back then, you'd get 5,000. So the first wave, you had to pay it back in your taxes. Nobody was lending. So then they said it's forgivable. You don't have to pay it back. So I bought this 2 houses on one lot for $74,900, and the government sent me a check in my taxes for $7,400. My first mortgage was $597. Taxes, insurance, payment was $597 a month. And my the first apartment I rented was $800. So just think about that. I have multiple units in these houses, and my monthly payment is less than $600, and just one apartment was renting for $800.
Jesus.
Yeah. So
Jesus.
I didn't pay anything.
Did you know anyone in the real estate kind of game to give you guidance on what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, or did you just?
We had looked at probably 20 something houses. I almost made an offer on one property. Thank God I didn't, because at that time, you were looking at a house and that house was going for $150,000. And then a month later, that same house was still there. Now it was $120,000. So you didn't know when to get in. And everybody was so nervous that the prices were going to continue to drop that they were just kind of staying to the sideline. Because I had read that book and because I had done a little bit more research, I understood that I wanted to buy a multifamily property. I wanted to rent that multifamily property. I wanted to then buy other properties, improve them, rent them, and hold or sell, because that was the way to gain financial independence and wealth, because I decided that I was going to pursue my passion, higher ed. That wasn't going to pay me a lot of money, right? But I didn't want to be unhappy making, quote unquote, a lot of money. I'd rather be at peace doing something that I know I was doing well, you know, impacting these youth. But, you know, that wasn't going to pay all of the bills.
Right.
I had some loans from undergrad. My parents, you know, I was helping my family at the time, so I knew I needed to figure out another way to do well financially while making sure that I, you know, went into work every day happy that I chose a decent path. Yeah.
Jeez Louise. Do you still have those today?
No. I sold those in 2019 and used the money as a significant down payment on a commercial building, on a six unit building.
Oh wow! And what city is the 6 unit?
That's in Pawtucket.
Okay, and do you have that today?
I do.
Oh wow!
I do. That's my kids. We can talk about this later, but that's my kids' college fund.
Gotcha. That's what's up, man. Real estate. I know we're bouncing all over the place, but with you, it's kind of hard not to. In the real estate realm, did you start off with a goal of like, okay, I want X amount of properties or X amount of commercial properties? Like, what was your goal in the real estate world?
I mean, initially it was follow this one plan, get a multifamily, you know, improve it, rent it, and then see if you can get more. I didn't want to spread myself too thin and didn't have a lot of access to people who were doing this. I actually, at the time, I remember I told two friends who were, you know, kind of well situated to get properties. They saw what I did, not to buy single family homes, right? You know, and they were in long-term relationships and their partners wanted to buy a single family.
Who are you telling?
So friend A didn't listen. Friend B didn't listen. Friend A, 5 or 6 years later, did the calculation, really understood, wow, okay, had I gone this route, I probably could have had, you know, more. So then he says, I'm going to sell this one and my partner's going to buy a single. I'm going to buy a multi, because they weren't married and they could do that. And then they could grow from there. So he, you know, I wouldn't say quickly, but understood, okay, I can do this differently now. Friend B, you know, really didn't understand the power of buying a multifamily early as like your first property, and then what that would mean down the road, and how you could, you know, pull equity or sell it, or, you know, do whatever, buy a second place for 5% down instead of having to put 20. And I think he's still trying to figure this out. And this is like 16, 17 years ago.
That's interesting, man. I'm like the least amount of like handy that there is, but there was nothing that was going to stop me from not getting into real estate, just because of all the examples that I've seen wealthy individuals play. And my dad always told me that it's also kind of a pressure against the economy. So as we know, the world's getting more and more expensive. Everything's up and up and up. And as the world goes up, time will show that real estate goes up too. Mm-hmm. And Rhode Island, unfortunately, rents go up too. So like, it's your kind of like safeguard. Like, it allows you to stay within the times. Right. And the same, it sounds like it happened to you, where it's like, you know, I don't have to be making a killing right here because I know this is going to keep me afloat over here. So that was very cool of you to do. Now, when it comes to finding your passion with working with the students, what was your next step with that?
So, as I mentioned, I was doing student conduct. So I was meeting with students who got into trouble and adjudicating those cases. I was creating policies, educating faculty, staff, and students on, you know, the process. I dealt with some really challenging cases, and I saw everything from minor infractions to bigger issues, drugs, sexual assault, um, suicide attempts, all sorts of cases, and it burnt me out after a while. So about 4 years in, I said, let me find something that keeps me working with students, but not necessarily doing student conduct. So I went into a role specifically focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was working in an intercultural center, working with international students and students of color, managing programs, advising, mentoring. So it kind of brought me a little bit closer to that work that I found a passion in and was doing on the side. It became my central focus. I did that for about almost 9 years, but I progressively moved up, over a period of time, went back to school, as you mentioned before. And so my last role in education was a little bit removed from the students.
And now during that 9 years, are you still like seeing what's out there with the real estate market, like picking up houses when you can and stuff like that?
So initially, it was buy and hold, and then buy another one, and then buy another one. So I bought 4 or 5 houses, and then was able to kind of wholesale. I didn't even know what I was doing was wholesaling when I did it. But I was able to guarantee someone a certain price if they allowed me to kind of sell their house, and then I was instructed in how to do that. And then I started working with a family member, a cousin of mine, and doing some flips. And so we did several, learned a big lesson on our first flip, lost a ton of money on that first flip, but it was a valuable lesson in how to select the right place, how to screen contractors, how to set a timeline, how to manage a budget, understanding the market that you're in. If you're buying a house in a very wealthy space, community, versus a house that is in kind of a middle market area, what are the types of upgrades people are going to expect in that property, the finishes. So again, it was a lesson well worth the loss, because 2 to 3 flips later we were back at even and then making some money.
Okay, very cool. So I mean, and that's a whole different game from like the sit and chilling, the multi thing.
Absolutely.
I'm scared of the flip game. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's too risky for me. But what's your favorite part of the real estate game? Because like I know that you're an actual real estate agent now.
I've been licensed for a year now. So that's a more recent development, and partially to save on some of these transactions. I'm always paying commissions to agents in my transactions, so it made sense to do that. And because I've also been giving advice for so long, it made sense that people can call me, ask for advice, and then potentially use my services professionally.
Right. Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. What is your favorite, I guess, real estate strategy? Is it the fix, flip, sell? Is it the get as many multis as possible? What is your, is it the Burr method? Like what is your favorite strategy to use?
It's probably boring, but buy and hold. And part of that is because real estate is a strategy for long-term wealth creation, for protecting yourself against economic downturns and building a little bit of wealth. I promise you, had I decided that I wanted to just be filthy rich, I would have probably just followed real estate to its end and probably would have done really well. But that wasn't my strategy. That wasn't why I got into it. It was really just to build some wealth, to help my family out, and to balance what I wasn't going to make early on in my career. And so flipping takes a lot of time and energy, right? It isn't what HGTV portrays. Right. Parts of it certainly, but it takes a lot of time and focus. Being an agent takes a lot of time and focus. And think about agents' hours. They're typically working with clients after hours at night, right? And on weekends. And I don't want to do that full time, because that's when my kids are out of school and we could have family time, right? So that was not going to be my play either. So I like, buying a property, improving it, giving people a decent space. And that's the other thing that, works against me financially. I don't care if it's a Section 8 tenant or a wealthy tenant. They deserve to live in a place with, that's clean, that everything is working, and that has the same level of care as any other space.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you charge outrageous prices just because that's what is on the market. I actually tend to keep my prices low. That family that first rented my place for $800 back when I bought that property in like '08. Mm-hmm. When I sold the house in 2019, they were paying $900. It had only gone up $100. And part of that is because they added a roommate in there. They brought a family member over, and that person was staying there, and that person had a kid. And so it was getting to be a bigger family. But, I tend to try to keep my rents reasonable for people, because I know what it's like to live in an apartment and hear, oh, the rent's going up. And then that means you might move, and you're trying to figure out where you're going. So I could have made a ton more money. So all of these strategies are cool. They're great. That isn't what I chase. And that's why losing all that money in that first, my cousin will tell you this. You had him on the show, and he talked about that one loss. He'll tell you, I was cool as a fan when we lost that money. Right. And I said, what, how are we going to do this differently?
Yeah.
And most people don't want to lose that much money early on, but I know that it's a long game. It's all right. We have others coming on the market. We'll be able to reconcile. We won't make any of those same mistakes. And that was the important part there.
Mm-hmm. And touching on, lastly, for real estate, the Feds met last week. They cut rates by 0.5 point. Where do you see us sitting by the end of the year in terms of mortgage rates? Do you think we'll be under 6? Do you think we'll be just at 6? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of movement by year's end. It really depends on, supply. Like, what factors impact supply? So a number of factors could impact supply. More time on the market impacts supply. So other houses are coming on, they're staying longer. That impacts pricing, right? Interest rates influence only so much. Interest rates don't have the same movement on pricing as supply does. Because when there's a whole lot of supply and little demand, those prices come down, because now you're trying to compete with the other seller to get your place sold. So that's what's going to impact it more than anything. So I don't want to predict. I think that interest rates month to month will come down either 0.5% or 0.25% as we see unemployment either remain steady or tick up, and inflation. And one of the leading factors is like durable goods sales and dryers and washers and that kind of stuff. So they look at those leading indicators in the market to see, okay, how are sales going there? They look at the unemployment, and once they bring that inflation into what they perceive as a good space, usually around 2%, they'll stop cutting. Right now, it's still just above 2%. So they're going to continue to see how it goes for a month and make their adjustment accordingly. And I have no idea how the election is going to impact this, because it does impact markets, but the economy is where the economy is, and the economy operates in cycles. And so economic policy and monetary policy are the levers that they can pull to try to influence the economy in one way or another. And obviously the president has a lot of say in that. But generally, you want the economy to have low unemployment. And so you create bills and you pull levers to try to do that. The unemployment rate is probably going to have a bigger impact on these cuts too, because unemployment rate, you want to spur economic activity, you cut rates, lending to get people out there, hopefully get businesses to try to hire more people, et cetera. So, I look at a bunch of these different things, but I can't make a prediction on any of them.
Gotcha. Switching gears now, when you mentioned before family time, your sons, how important is it to be in their lives?
I mean, it's everything. I have a 3-year-old son, a 6-year-old son, and I actually have a 4-year-old daughter. So 3 of them. And, time is the most valuable resource anybody has. And money can help, because that means, I can pay someone to cut the grass instead of me spending an hour, 2 hours to cut the grass. That's an hour, 2 hours I can spend with my children. But I firmly believe that spending as much time with my kids so they can learn from me. I'm their primary educator is extremely important. And they pick up both what you try to teach them when you're paying attention, and they pick up what you aren't trying to teach them, right? How you interact with your partner, how you manage stressful situations, how you talk to them when you're stressed out. And so I try to be cognizant of all of this when I'm around them, and I try to make sure that I'm teaching them lessons. Even though they're still 3 and 6 and fairly young, they're absorbing a lot of it.
And does it trip you out just knowing that, like, the upbringing that they're about to have is going to be, like, complete 360
Always.
from the one that you had?
Always. And it's interesting.
Is that enough, by the way? Like, have you completed your job as a father by being able to foster a loving and safe environment? Like, is that, like, checkmate?
Well, so not necessarily. I think environments that are overly safe can be detrimental to development. So there's always got to be enough challenge in a child's life so they can develop the skill sets early on to navigate challenges, to navigate conflict, to navigate safety themselves, because you can't be with your child 24/7. So I want to provide opportunities for my kids, but I want to make sure that they see that there's plenty of examples of how I grew up and what I had to navigate, and how they're growing up and how it's different. But I try not to make my kids live too easy of a life. Because they're not going to develop in the ways that I think people should develop. Which is a healthy balance. They should always feel loved. They should never question those aspects. But I think they need to be on a playground with other kids, and sometimes, have those different conversations, maybe get into a dusting or two, and realize, they got to stand up for themselves. They got to stand up for one another, their siblings. They have to recognize where danger lies and dangerous people where they don't know. I learned that very young, and I continue to learn that. And you develop this sixth sense when you grow up, like, quote unquote, in the hood. You just understand what it is, and they're not going to have that sixth sense. So I have to make sure that there's ways they develop it. Something I'm trying to figure out now
Is, unfortunately, Rhode Island, it seems like the more diverse a school is, like, the worse it is. Besides, like, a classical, maybe. When it comes to, like, upbringing and, like, the city that you live in and things like that, was that, like, calculated to a T, or are you kind of like, all right, I just like to live in whatever city, and, like, I'm gonna let the chips kind of fall as they may? There's always private school, there's always basketball if I want them to be somewhere else. Like, what was your thoughts around, like, picking a place to live and, like, in the schools and stuff like that?
So one thing that you said, the more diverse it is, the worse it is. I want to correct you there. It isn't. Sometimes we think, there's causation, there's correlation. Historically, public schools tend to not get the same support as private schools for a number of reasons. But geography plays a bigger part in that than anything else. And sometimes those schools were really diverse, but as a result of what they call white flight, for example, a lot of families removed themselves from the public school system and went into suburban areas and private schools. And you can look at a whole bunch of data from the Brown v. Board era, right? 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, desegregated schools. It really kind of forced busing from urban areas, urban cores, into those suburban schools, into those white schools, decimated the black teacher population. And you had a lot of impact as a result. So what we see today in schools that are quote unquote urban or really diverse is a divestment. And so when you don't have the best resources, when you don't have a good tax base, you can't pay teachers what they're supposed to get paid. You can't provide the support services. You end up basically removing all of the support systems that help those schools thrive. So what do you do? The question is, what do you do? Knowing that, do you put your child into a school system where you know they don't have the resources and capabilities to support your child? And I'm talking about support your child even in the best of circumstances, even if your child doesn't have a lot of needs, right? If your child is an average student who can get by fine, doesn't need language support, doesn't need, individualized educational support or anything like that, you're still worried that your child is gonna flounder in those school systems. So we haven't figured that out yet. And, while I appreciate what charter schools do, because charter schools intentionally diversify student populations, especially some of the ones that we see in Rhode Island, they'll pull from different communities. regardless of the socioeconomic background of the child, and put them in a similar environment and support that child. Different curriculum, they don't have the same standards. I'm fascinated by that, but I don't have an answer, man. I think, we're at a space in our lives that we can afford to put our children in private education. And so we've had those discussions. Right now, our children are in, a charter education, and we appreciate, where it's, at least my oldest right now is, but it is difficult. And that's, this is a whole other conversation, but that's partially why I do some of the work that I do on some of the boards that I'm on some of the engagements that my time is precious, and I want to spend it with family, but I also feel this overwhelming responsibility to be in those spaces where decisions are made about education, where decisions are made about funding from, local municipalities. I try to make my voice heard because, again, I feel this responsibility. There's not a lot of people who look like us in these spaces and who can talk from experiences in these kind of urban, ghettoized environments. I barely had any teachers of color growing up, right? I barely see any school committee members that look like me. And so it's difficult when you're trying to make sure that these schools are supporting these youth, understand the situations that they come from, but don't look at it like it's charity, right? Because it shouldn't be looked at in that way. So it is very hard. It's one of the most difficult decisions, like how do you pick a school that's right for your child? But it's really thinking about the framework. Do you invest in the public system by putting your children in there and supporting them and lending your time in PTA? Or do you try to fast track your kids' development by putting them in a either a private school or some version of charter? We haven't figured it out.
You had a lot of answers today, but not that one, huh?
Definitely not that one.
Because it's funny because I'm just going back and forth with my wife right now, and like I don't know what to do, man. I don't know what to do. Hopefully, I get some answers soon, but because my mom, she lives in Jersey, and there's a city in Jersey called South Orange, and it's a bunch of like it's a half. I would say it's a good mix of like maybe 60% black, 40% white, and it's like doctors, lawyers, execs. They shared a backyard with like a ESPN announcer and all this other stuff. So it's like I wish we had something like that here. We don't. So it's tough. It's tough. My father, he worked in the Providence Public School. He was a higher up over there. He just retired actually. So I think there's also something to be said of like you wanting to make a change by your presence, but not necessarily having to put your kid through it either.
Yeah, I mean, it's about you can be safe in the house, but then what happens in the environment? Yeah. Right. So when I was younger, and I've shared this in other public venues, unfortunately, the people that I looked up to when I was young were drug dealers. That's who I looked up to. And if you ask me why, not that I didn't look up to people on television, but I didn't know those people, right? Yeah. Like folks who had great accomplishments. But people who look like me, the reason I say I looked up to them is because what I saw was nice clothes, nice cars, and I was poor. But not only did I see that, but they were the ones on the basketball courts when we were just hanging out, and they say, okay, who's king of the court? And they would pull out a few dollars and say, all right, whoever's king of the court gets $5. And so, you'd win and get $5. But then everybody got $1 or $2 too, just for being out there. And then you'd hear these stories and you'd see it of somebody's house burning down and who was coming to their aid. I actually had a friend whose mother passed away, and then she was the caretaker of her siblings. And within 24 hours, they had, and this was a lot of money at the time, $10,000 brought to her, like, here you go, like, take care of your siblings. So you see that and you're like, wow, okay, this is what I see in my city. I didn't see lawyers and doctors in Pawtucket. I know they existed. I wasn't ignorant to that, but they wouldn't come back.
They weren't touchable.
They didn't come back and give that guidance, and they didn't occupy the streets. You didn't walk down the street and see somebody in a suit. Right. And so I said to myself when I really understood, okay, if I ever become successful, I'm going to come back and I'm going to give my time. I'm going to give my resources. I'm going to make sure that people see that whatever I become, this was very aspirational, it's possible
Yeah,
for you too.
yeah.
And I'm still here.
That's such a good point, because like it's one thing to say, oh, become this, become that, but if you don't see it, if you can't touch it, like it becomes a fantasy almost. Like it's like, oh yeah, it sounds good, but I know that I can do this because I'm seeing this person right here. It's another reason why, like, you know, I admire your humbleness. I think that there's also maybe another aspect of, like, you know, if you have the nice car, but you go back to where you grew up and you say, hey, like, you want to know how I got this? It wasn't from what you're used to. Because it's like, oh, like, a lot of people don't even know that, like, you can make a lot of money by being a head top tier professional of, you know, your path. Like, I I had a kid come up to me one day and he's like, did you win this in a contest? Because
your car?
My car, yeah. Because he never saw like a black man like that was whatever and wasn't a gangster and all this stuff, like drive a car like that. And he was dead serious. So I think there's a cool aspect of both, of like, you know, obviously being humble and carrying yourself, but also letting like people know that, like, hey, like, as long as you're the top notch and as long as you strive to be the best in whatever lane you want to be in, like the money will come. You make the right investments, you do the right real estate plays, like the money is there legally. It's going to take longer. Yeah. You're going to have to eat dirt for a little bit longer, but at the end, it's all worth it. I think that's a super important message for the young folks out there.
And not only is it important for all the reasons that you mentioned, but the alternative doesn't have many pathways. I mean, you think about it.
Yeah.
When you're 16, 17, you don't have the same value system, right?
Right, of course.
You don't even value life the same way. You haven't lived enough to understand what it is to take a breath every day. Sadly, right? Because your brain isn't fully developed, especially young boys. And so when you see this fast track set of opportunities to join this gang, run with this crew, etc., it seems like it's, one, it might be your only option. Two, it might be a reasonable option in comparison to the guy you see clocking in at Walmart, and you're like, damn, that's not the life I want.
Yeah.
Right? But life is so much more than those two polar opposites. And that's what going into communities and talking to youth does, is it shows them that there's a million different pathways. And based on where they want to be, they can pursue one or more, and they don't even have to keep the same goal. But if they're motivated to do better every single year, they just keep opening more doors. So they might want to be a doctor, but they may end up being, something else. But following that pathway opens up those doors. And then I'll just say one other thing, which I think is also important. And this isn't a critique of you at all, but when I was able to afford the car that I really wanted, I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it. And I guess talking to youth in ways that motivates them is important. Like you want a nice car, these are options for you. You got to do this, X, Y, Z. But you get to a certain place where, the money, the material goods, et cetera, don't define you no matter what, but aren't the characteristics that should be in the conversation. I had a friend who calls me and he's like, yo, you're cheap. You never spoil yourself. You don't really spend any money on yourself. And I'm like, well, what does that do for me? He's like, what you mean? He's got a really nice watch, this friend, and a really nice car. And I said, those things don't make me happy. At the end of the day, when you pass away, what do you want people to say about you at your funeral? He had the nicest car. Right. The things that are going to be on your friend's memory, your family's memory, is the time you spent with them, how you treated them, how you impacted people that you didn't even know, right? What you did for the common good. Yeah. What you get. So those things, and I learned pretty young because you're also very flashy and people are starting to, pay attention to you. Because remember, I grew up with that sixth sense of if you look like you got it, somebody's going to jump through your window to go get it from you. So I learned to kind of keep it more moderate. But then I realized the power in that, in not being beholden to acquiring the next $700 pair of sneakers or or a flashy car, and really being happy at wherever you are. Because I think that's long lasting, and I try to have conversations along that line too.
How do you measure success?
I measure success in fulfillment, happiness and fulfillment. Do you feel fulfilled in your life? Do you feel, happy? Not every single day, but happy with where you are. You're standing with your family, friends, your day to day, fulfillment and happiness.
Two good friends of yours. Can you name them real quick?
Two good friends. Yeah.
I know you have more. But.
Yeah. I'll say my boy Kenny. I've known him since elementary school, since the Power Ranger days. Kenny and Lewis.
Okay. So if I go to Kenny and I go to Lewis and I say, what is the biggest thing that Kevin needs to work on? What would each one of them tell me?
They would say the same thing. They would say, I need to probably take some things off my plate and focus a little bit more time on me.
Okay.
But I'll say, I agree with them, but I always come back to that responsibility, right? So if I'm not in some of the spaces that I'm in, because there's only one or two of us, is that consideration going to be given for the community that I represent? Rhode Island has like 7,000 nonprofits. Those boards have considerable power in a lot of ways. They can influence legislation. They can funnel resources into specific programs and communities. And so being able to make your voice present at that table when they're making decisions is powerful.
Yeah.
And that 14-year-old boy who was in the streets has no idea that that's part of his journey. And some of my friends, they focus on family, their day-to-day, and that's great because I want to do less. But I always feel this overwhelming burden that, what would your ancestors think if you had these opportunities and you said, nah, I'm going to watch football on Sunday or, so they're right. Both of them are right and others. Yeah. But I really struggle with that.
What do you believe to be true that most people don't?
What do I believe to be true that most people don't? I can give you a quick bad one, and that's LeBron is the best basketball player that has ever graced this earth. And a lot of my friends don't believe that. But one thing that I truly believe that most people don't, I don't know. I think one of the things that I often have conversations about is this concept of letting your kids struggle, like purposely allowing your kids a certain level of struggle to your own discomfort is good for them. Because you're going to traumatize your kids one way or another, right? And part of I think what a parent is doing is like picking the challenges that you want for your kids as best you can to make sure that they develop, this ability to navigate life on their own terms. But I have these conversations and so many people are like, I don't know. If you have the opportunity to do this, why would you put your children, through that?
Yeah. And kind of to talk back about our conversation about living and stuff like that. Right now in my head, it's like, it's going to be a strict like earning system. So like, if you get all A's, like, you want the newest pair of shoes, sure. Like, but you're going to earn it. I'm not just going to give you the newest pair of shoes because they dropped. So like, for me, it's going to be like, okay, I worked hard. I did what I was supposed to do. Like, and then I earned something. Like, so far, that's in my head, my middle ground to weave through, because it's the same situation, especially with, my wife. She's from Woonsocket.
Woonsocket is like, Pawtucket or Providence North, man. It's not too different. But I'll challenge one other thing. Yeah. So that earning system for me, I prefer to spend money on experiences with my children instead of like the material goods. Because again, I think there's a lesson in that. You do really well in school, let's go, to the zoo one other time, or something that they haven't experienced before. Because I think those experiences teach them that this is what's meaningful and this is what has value.
Yeah.
Time together, doing new things that you appreciate, as opposed to let's go get some ice cream. Let's go, I got you this pair of shoes for your birthday, etc. Yeah. And I actually learned that from a good friend who almost always gifts in that way. He gifts like, entry to a new theme park, or, an excursion, something that you can do with your children to make sure that they're valuing that time.
Putting time and experiences on the merit to be earned.
That's right. Well, you're going to do that no matter what. But when you go above and beyond, like, we were going to go to, the water park at the end of the year, but, we're going to go to Six Flags New Jersey Safari instead, right? Like, because you really did well this year, so we're going to spend, an extra night there. We're going to get a hotel. We're going to check out, et cetera, et cetera. So, you want to always kind of spend time with your kids no matter what. But, again, placing value and showing the importance of experiences and togetherness above material items, because they're going to get that externally. Like, they're going to come home and say, why don't I have a tablet? My 6-year-old says that right now. Why don't I have a tablet? I don't put my kids in front of screens. No phones, no tablets. They have one of those writing tablets that you press a button and it disappears. That's the only tablet they have, because there's a lot of data on how negatively it impacts children, especially in their developmental years. So I'd rather say, nope, we're going to go outside and ride that bike.
It's the best and worst thing that's happened. There's no other way to split it. The best and worst thing. I agree with that. And kudos to you, because you got to have some difficult conversations when every one of their friends at school has a tablet, has a cell phone, has all this stuff, and you're just like, nope. All right. If you could live in any city in America, right, and your family would go with you, you would have the same job, even if your friends somehow found a way to live over there with you, what city would you pick and why?
It would probably be somewhere in the DMV. And I say that because when you think about outcomes for Black people, the DMV is where they have the best outcomes: educational, quality of life, health, economic opportunities. That's where it's at. So I would want that, and I would want to be surrounded by that. So that it's not a city specifically, but that region, and most of it kind of in Maryland, I think is what comes to mind when I think about that. Truthfully, though, I've traveled this country. I've traveled the world. I'm not the most traveled person, but I absolutely love Rhode Island. I absolutely love Rhode Island. I think Rhode Island, pound for pound, is one of the best states, and Providence is one of the best cities that you could call home.
That's fire. What's your most regretful purchase?
My most regretful purchase?
The flip doesn't count.
Yeah, no, I learned that. I don't regret that at all. I don't regret that at all. One of my my first car is one of my most regretful purchases, and I sold it less than a year later. I was 18 years old, and I bought, this was in 2004, I bought a 2001 Buick LeSabre, cash. Paid for the insurance, put the Vogues on it, tinted it down, had the 2004 Park Ave
I'm dying too,
factories.
What was that like? Was the Houston thing happening at that time too?
I don't remember. Maybe a little bit, but I love Buicks, and the car was 3 years old, and I had worked, stacked my money, and I wanted to get something nice. And what I found was I kept getting pulled over by the police. I kept getting attention from girls and from other people that I knew had nothing to do with who I was as a person, and it reinforced the lesson that I had already learned before, which is, if you're too high profile, if you're too visible, if people have these perceptions of you, it's not a good thing. Yeah. And so I sold it within a year, and I was riding the bus. I was already at college at the time. I was riding a bus for the next probably like 3-4 months, and then I bought a 92 Oldsmobile just to get me back and forth, a Delta 88, love that thing with the velour seats, just to get back and forth. And I regretted it because it it taught me exactly what I had already come to know and continued to learn thereafter, which is, those material things, those flashy items, especially in the hood, they're not going to bring anything good.
Yeah, yeah. When it's all said and done, how would you like to be remembered?
I think as somebody who just cared and who cared about his family, cared about his community, and made somebody's life better because I was around.
I mean, dude, you did all those things already. We need a new list.
There's people who sadly are no longer with us who did that, for me. And a recent person would be Earl Smith III, Cedric Huntley. These are men of color who were revered by their communities because they poured into others. They were examples of men who cared for community, wanted to leave a legacy, not because they wanted their names out there, but because they knew they had the responsibility to improve that next generation.
Yeah.
And I admire that. And there are others that I could name, but I admire that. And I don't think there's anything better that somebody could say than, because I knew this person or because I interacted with this person, my life has improved.
I agree with that. And kind of giving back to my community is also like something that I think about damn near on the, weekly basis. And it's dope too, because it's one of those things where it's like, doesn't matter like where I end up living or whatever the case is, like I'm always going to give back to the place that brought me up. Because like how we talked about before, like we want the kids seeing that, like we want the kids being able to touch us, right? Like it's just super, super important. Do you have any last questions for me?
If you could talk to your 14-year-old self, what advice would you give that boy?
Whew. I was a completely different person at 14. Shoot. That's a great question. I would tell him to start doing things to build his self-esteem. At 14, my self-esteem was shit. So, 14, is that still middle school?
It could be freshman year of high school.
So my roughest years, like you said, were in middle school, and it was simply just because I'm following the crowd, following the wrong people. I'm actively like Get Rich or Die Trying comes out, so everyone's a gangster. Like you can't tell no one's a gangster, right? So I'm actively trying to just do stuff that's just not in my character. It's just not who I am. It's not how I was raised. It's not, you know what I mean? It's just like so out of whack with like who I am as a person. So if I was to talk to my 14-year-old self, I would say trust your gut and just like be cool with who you really are. Like you don't have to be, this tough guy. You don't have to be this whatever. Like you can be the really intelligent person who likes to be nice to people. Like that's okay. If you remember middle school, like that's actually not like, it sounds so crazy. It sounds saying it now, it sounds so crazy, but like that like legitimately was not okay just to like be nice to people. Imagine like another brother that you see in the hallway from time to time and just saying like, what's up? Things are so messed up that would be a threat. If you said what's up to a person that you didn't really know in middle school, that was a threat.
And that's what I talk about, normalizing environments and situations that when you gain a little bit more life experience and step away from, you realize, wow.
Yeah.
Like this isn't, nor should it be, a normal experience.
Yeah. So I don't think I've ever talked about this, but it was funny because there was this little like clique. They say gang, but there was this like little clique called Animal Cage. And I don't know how familiar you are with like East Providence, but like, are you familiar with like Kent Farms, like that area?
Not really.
All right, it's like a kind of like projects called Kent Farms, and I live not too far from there, and I was trying to join them, and you know, they would do stuff that would be out too late, and my dad would be on my ass. So I couldn't like really join them just because like I wasn't willing to get an ass whooping and stuff like that. But that's how far like off the beaten path I was. That like I'm actively trying to like just do like knucklehead stuff. So at 14 years old, I would definitely tell myself, yo, you like playing sports, you like getting good grades, you like carrying yourself like a well-to-do person. You like being nice to people, and that's okay. Because no one really, my father, of course, but you think your father is just telling you because
he's too close. You can't see it.
No one has ever said to someone that age during that time that it's okay to be like that. So that would be like the biggest thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would be the biggest thing. Pretty long talk. It's funny because I texted you ahead of time and told you 45 minutes. Here we are at an hour and 15.
Yeah.
But I really thoroughly appreciate your time. I think that this was really enlightening. I think that a lot of people needed to hear this, and hope to hear more from you because you really have a wonderful story. You have a wonderful way of carrying yourself and speaking for yourself. So I hope that this isn't the last kind of like, I know you like to be in the cut. I hope this isn't the last like time that people get to see you on some sort of screen.
Oh man, would love to come back and do more of this in general, man. I appreciate you having me.
That's what's up, man. Y'all stay smooth out there.